Hid for a few weeks before it came to me. I had to choose my heart, heal and get free. She said life's easy, pain comes with living. Surround myself with everything God's given. It's time to change my routine, create a new scene that feels like an unreachable dream.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, and happy Friday to all. This, of course, is Mentally How Are You? And I am your host, Neena Lock, here to discuss all things mental healing. I hope everyone is keeping warm during this weather shift we are experiencing. Please remember the city has warming centers you can visit to help at this time. Those centers will be linked to this episode, so just click more and click on the link and you'll see where you're able to go for the rest of the month or any time that it gets freezing cold like this. This month, we are going to discuss a subject that has become a common phrase and unfortunately clickbait. However, it is extremely important to understand. That subject is trauma. Because the topic is vital to many around the world, we have decided to break it down into a series. So for the next 3 Fridays, tell everyone you know to tune in and grow with us in the knowledge of what trauma is, how it affects the brain and body, and how to cope through those effects. So let's get started. Trauma is defined as an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by a group or an individual as physically, emotionally, or mentally injurious or life-threatening. These events can have a lasting adverse effect on the body and the brain. Traumatic events range from one-time incidences to chronic life-transforming experiences. Trauma comes in different forms, such as acute, chronic, complex, and historical, and sometimes I like to add historical/generational trauma. So basically, trauma is what's best described as a disruption in your foundation. And the core of your foundation, it disrupts these areas, these places and spaces, either mentally or physically. It is strong enough to shake you into a feeling and appearing of being unrepairable. Again, there are at least 4 categories of trauma. One is acute, chronic, complex, and that historical/generational. I'm going to get into breaking some of these down for you just so that we can lead with this episode with understanding exactly what it is so that there's no confusion as we continue to move forward. So to start with acute, it's a single isolated incident such as an accident or a natural disaster or an act of violence that happens against you. This one incident may take just one time, a brief moment it can be, or it can be a long-lasting effect. And it may have shaken you to your core and disrupted your ability to self-regulate or function. Chronic trauma is traumatic experiences that are repeated and prolonged. So this would include issues such as family or community violence or abuse, things like exposure to war, and even consistent bullying. Yes, I said consistent bullying. I know that sometimes we rub bullying off and we feel like, oh, no big deal. It's a part of being in school, or it's a part of joining the workplace or joining a different group of individuals. However, the consistency in it can be very traumatic to individuals, and then they become defensive, and it's kind of something hard to get out of. So remember, for chronic issues or chronic trauma, it's about the problem being prolonged, not so much exactly what happened, but it being prolonged, meaning it happens continuously over and over again to this one individual or this one group. Now, complex trauma is exposure to multiple traumatic events from an early age, often within the caregiving system, meaning from parents or guardians, or without adequate adult support. And this has short and long-term effects in many areas. Examples of complex trauma include physical, mental, or sexual, and even emotional abuse, paired with ongoing neglect. So, for instance, sometimes I think when we think about trauma, we mainly focus on this, right? Because it's about somebody going through something at a very young age and it continuing, being prolonged, that consistent behavior. And these are normally the stories that we hear or call horror stories that individuals have went through. So when trauma is discussed with complex trauma, it's the main thing that people think about when we're talking about it in society, on podcasts, on different shows, in different discussions with different people, right? We hear about complex trauma stories where someone may have been abused by their parent or loved one from, let's say, ages 5 to 15. And now as an adult, they have a difficult time functioning in healthy relationships because of where they came out of, or what they had to come against, right? So complex trauma is where it's just like the word says, it's complex, it's very difficult. You got to dig in there, and there's some stuff that's underneath that you may have never even talked about or discussed. I do want individuals to know, though, that acute trauma and chronic trauma do exist. Complex is not the only one, even though we focus on it a lot in society. Lastly, there is the historical or that generational trauma. This is trauma that is a collective trauma experienced by a group across generations that are still suffering the effects and current experiences of race-based trauma. We hear this come up in examples of systemic racism, systemic oppression and discrimination, or harassment against one group of people. In order to understand trauma, we have to understand which main category it belongs in. This helps us during the healing process because it works to keep a focal point or focus point on what has occurred in your life. Now, I know with breaking those 4 categories down, sometimes you might meet a counselor or a therapist who has kind of created their own little branch off from those categories, and that's fine, right? Each of us have our different specialties or have seen different things when working with different communities or different groups of individuals, so it makes sense if someone adds a little bit more to your, let's say, resume of therapy. However, those are the 4 main categories. So I think when we discuss it, when you're trying to figure out, like, have I experienced trauma? Have I been through this or that? You can think about these categories that we just went through: acute, chronic, and then that complex and historical or generational. If you belong in one of those slots, and I don't even like saying it that way, however, we do have to break it down this way, but if you belong in one of those slots, that will lead to better understanding of the things you're going through, what you've experienced. It will give you definition to what you've experienced and the right words to use for it, and then that helps with the healing journey. So healing is not just about hearing these things, it's about educating yourself. So whatever you hear from me, go and double down and, research for yourself, or reach out to a therapist and discuss what you have heard here. Educate yourself so that you can move forward in your growing process. Today we're going to move forward to pop psych versus clinical psychology. Of course, here we discuss the facts and clinical workings of trauma, from traumatic events to responses, triggers, and treatment. So I'm going to start with, of course, I think I'll do 4 today. One is that everything isn't trauma. I need to bust up this myth. I went to a recent event in which a speaker asked for everyone who had experienced trauma to raise their hands. A few did and many didn't, and the speaker then said, "Those of you who did not raise your hand, trust me, you've experienced trauma." This is not true. Everything is not trauma. We have become so clinically unclinical due to all voices being amplified at this time that we are now speaking as if we are clinically trained when we are not. And I don't mean to sound harsh when I say this, but we do have to speak the truth, and we have to hear without ears of offense, right? That's the only way you'll be able to get the real truth, is that you're able to hear things without being offended. And then you're able to really grasp concepts, you're able to educate yourself and move forward. So what I mean by what I just said is that you would not go to, let's say, a vehicle mechanic to inquire about a health diagnosis, right? So why continue to fill up on information from sources that are speaking their opinion? Everything is not trauma or a diagnosis. Some things were just rough or difficult, or you had a hard time. Maybe it was unpleasant or uncomfortable, but not all things are traumatic. So everybody in society has not gone through a traumatic incident or timing in their life, right? It's okay to say, you know what, this was a rough patch for me, but it doesn't mean it was a traumatic patch for you. All right, so that's myth number one I have to bust up. The second one is, I believe I've said this before, but trauma bonds are not what we continue to call them, ladies and gentlemen. I've heard the term used to describe parallel lives, meaning two people share a common experience. So maybe you are in a relationship in which the both of you have experienced losing a parent, let's say. Maybe there was even some trauma in your individual lives, and now coming together, you have that common experience and you confide in one another. Many believe this to be a trauma bond. It is not. This is called a parallel life or a life experience that's in unison. Or you can even say that you're struggling with a familiar spirit, right? Like you are drawn to a person with the same experiences as you because of a familiar spirit. That's not a trauma bond. A trauma bond is an unhealthy emotional attachment that develops between a victim and the abuser in situations of prolonged abuse, neglect, and mental harm, in that category of that chronic trauma or complex trauma, right? The way this works out is the abuser alternates between abuse and loving behaviors, which confuses the victim. A victim can become deeply attached despite being abused from the abuser to the abuser due to the confusion, right? And then feels unable to leave. The abuse is then rationalized, and at times the victim will blame even themselves, leaving them feeling trapped and powerless in the abuse and unable to leave or to go. Right? So that's a trauma bond. It's when you have natural healthy feelings like love towards someone who is abusive or has abused you, but you don't leave it even, and you can't see clearly that it is abuse. That's a trauma bond. You going through something that your mate has gone through or your best friend has gone through, or whomever you're connected to in any relationship, if the two of you have a similar story, like I said, you both lost parents at a young age is a perfect example, I think, because I think that happens a lot, right? So if two people lost parents, then they have that understanding with one another about not having someone that they once loved so much and needed in their lives. And now the two of you come together and you believe you can build on that. And when things become in disarray, right? So when you're bumping heads, then and you don't leave the relationship, you then believe I'm in a trauma bond. But that's not the case. What you're in is a parallel experience. And because the two of you have never taken the time to heal individually, your trauma then collides. And this is where the arguments, the fights, the back and forth goes. This is where you just can't get things back right, or you're continuously searching for the beginning again because you're both naturally stuck in a cycle like that in life anyhow. But now that you've come together, you have a partner along with it. So that's a paralleled experience, or entertaining a familiar spirit or a soul tie. Right? That's a soul tie, but it is not a trauma bond. A trauma bond, the distinctive definition, that difference here is that a trauma bond would be between a victim, and I understand that some people don't like to call themselves a victim. I'm just using the term to help you understand what I'm talking about. But it's between a victim and an abuser, not two people who have the same experience. So that's one myth. Third myth is that trauma always leads to PTSD. This is not true. To start, one, there are other diagnoses related to trauma, and we'll discuss those down the line. However, you also may not always have a diagnosis. So PTSD, one, is not the only trauma diagnosis. And in fact, about only 6 to 8% of the population have been diagnosed with PTSD. Remember, for any diagnoses, you have to meet criteria for it, right? You have to meet the signs, the symptoms, and things that are going on. It's not just handed to you as a label. A diagnosis is not your identity. It is the information provided to help us understand what we are going through, but it's not who you are, right? So let's come out of being so concerned or wrapped up in diagnoses and understand that that's not the goal. The goal is for you to understand what you're going through and to be able to form a blueprint or a plan to grow through or out of it. But PTSD is not the only trauma diagnosis, and if you have a traumatic experience, it does not mean you automatically have PTSD. My fourth and final myth for today is that I've heard many say discussing the trauma is always helpful. I think this is becoming common to say or to talk about, but this is not true. In situations such as, let's say, complex trauma, sometimes reviewing or outlining the occurrences is not helpful because it can pull the person deeper into the traumatic space. So sometimes you don't always need to review what you have gone through or what you've been through. You can simply excuse me, you can simply know that experience and understand it. Maybe you need to explain some details to a counselor and a therapist, but you don't have to go through the entire breakdown of the traumatic experience, because sometimes that will just break you down all the more and create more things like flashbacks for you, okay? So those are our myths that we had to bust up for today. I hope you are learning something from it, and I hope you heard with open ears and not ears of offense. We're going to move on to our mentally how are you question. Today, this one reads, "Hey Nina, I'm a Black man in my 30s, learning a lot from the show. Thank you. I was never a soldier or in the military, but I believe I have PTSD. What would be the best way to better my mental health if I do have it outside of medicine?" Okay, so with that, I don't have a lot of details about why you believe you may have PTSD, but I will say I like what you highlighted, that you've never been in the military. You don't have to only have been in the military to experience PTSD or have that diagnosis, so it is possible to have it outside of that. I will say that, one, you need to engage in therapy. You guys should know that whenever you ask me a question on mentally how are you, I'm going to say you should speak with a therapist or a counselor to confirm your thoughts of what you may be going through. But therapy would be good. I think therapy such as cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure therapy really helps out. I also think that things naturally should occur. So like switch to healthy lifestyle choices, such as set a routine and a regular schedule, regular exercise, a balanced diet, and adequate sleep, right? Sometimes individuals who struggle with PTSD symptoms don't get adequate sleep, and that really takes them deeper into the symptoms associated with the diagnoses. So I would say to check your routine, how you're handling things, what you're eating, what you're drinking, and what you're doing throughout your day to help with these symptoms naturally without medication. But then also build a support system with friends, family, community members, all the more. Remember that it's important to have community if you feel like you're struggling with any types of signs from PTSD, because it's very easy whenever you run into any traumatic symptoms, feelings, or diagnoses to isolate yourself from others. And oftentimes that's the very support you need, is to be able to talk to someone else. And you don't have to have a deep conversation about what you're feeling or what you're thinking. You can do that in therapy. But you should have community support, friendship support, or family support you can dig into, where you just say, hey, I'm going to come over and watch the game, or I'd like to hang out tonight if you're able to, where you're doing something that will keep you from the thoughts that are already circling and racing in your mind. So hopefully that helps you for what you are looking for. If you write in and you give me further details, I can give you more pinpointed examples of things you can do. For everyone else, remember to email any of your mental health questions to mentallyhowareyou@gmail.com, and we will be able to help you with whatever it is you need to discuss. Now, for our toolbox techniques, I want to point out that when we discuss coping strategies, this is not the weekly goal for therapeutic work or counseling, right? Like, this is not the main journey. So when we talk about coping strategies, I want to be clear that I go over the toolbox technique for you to receive help. But this is not the weekly goal for therapeutic work or counseling. This is not the only thing you'll do in counseling. Coping strategies are for us to deal effectively with something mentally difficult. However, that then should lead to growth and resilience. So first, I would like everyone to note that every toolbox technique that I have ever provided on this show can be used for coping through the effects of trauma. However, today we will focus on what's called catch and check your thoughts. This is literal. You are going to pay attention to your inner self-talk throughout the day and identify negative patterns as they arise, such as, let's say, self-doubt or fear. Then push forth positive self-talk. Excuse me, I need to drink of water. Woo! The weather changes. May Whew. Let me catch my breath. Whew. Don't worry, this is not live. Just joking. Okay, so catch and check. You're going to catch your thoughts that could be negative, and then you're going to work on reframing those negative thoughts and shifting your mindset. I cannot get this out of my throat. Whew. I think I got it. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Whew, you're going to shift your mindset. I just had to shift mine for a second to get it into a mode of protecting myself to push through instead of rushing through. So with the negative thoughts that you have, you are going to check them by shifting your mindset, by stating what you can and will do. What is real, what is truthful, instead of what you feel. So in a moment, you may feel something different from what is actually going on. Currently, for a second, I can use this example. I felt a little panicked because I'm thinking, oh no, I'm live on the show. I'm talking to individuals trying to help them. And the first thing I was trying to do was gulp down water so that I could hurry up and get back to speaking with you and talking to you. But what I had to do was take a minute to actually breathe out so that I can complete the actual show. So this is actually bizarre for me in the moment, but a perfect example. This can happen to you naturally if you are, like I said, going through self-doubt or fear. You may be feeling something that is real for you and within your feeling. However, what you're actually going through is not worthy of those thoughts. So what you're going to do is catch those negative thoughts, right? Immediately, you'll kind of check yourself like, wait, am I in a situation where I actually need to doubt myself or be fearful? If that's not real, then let me lead with the truth. This is where you will check it. You're going to lead with what is true. So remember, feelings will deceive us. Focus on the facts and work through the plan. Work through the plan of what you actually come up with from truthful information, okay? So catch and check is your wellness in 60 seconds today. I don't know if that just took me 1 minute, but you got a real life example just now. Again, today's episode has a list of all warming centers you can utilize in the city when temps drop. And we also have a search link prepared with trauma-informed therapists in the area. So I've done the work for you where you don't have to Google and search and go through all of the outlets to find a trauma-informed therapist. If you click on the link below this episode, you will be able to see that there are several within the area: St. Charles, Bolingbrook, Aurora, any place around the Aurora city, you'll be able to find a trauma-informed therapist. So I want to thank you all for sitting with me on this episode of Mentally How Are You? It is my hope that you are leaving more stable than when you came in, and I will see you guys next Friday. Bye.
No judgment, just love, so I can be me. I'm tired of hearing it's okay not to be okay. Just want the dark days to go away. Mentally, how are you? How are you? Yeah, I know it's hard, but you can get well if you want to. Mentally, how are you? Yeah, I know it's hard, but you can get well if you want